Welcome to the TCJ podcast, where we discuss curious, thought-provoking, and sometimes controversial ideas through the lens of biblical wisdom. I'm your host, Keith Wood. Today, my guest is Dr. Tammie McClafferty. Tammie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So you are, you do a lot of stuff. One thing you do is that you're the CEO of LifeWork Leadership First Coast, and that's an organization whose vision is to bring vitality to cities by transforming and mobilizing Christian business leaders. In addition to that, you're also a member of TCJ's board of directors, and you're an assistant professor of education. So you do some teaching both online and here on campus as well.
Yes.
So today we're going to be talking, I guess, kind of merging both sides of you, the education and the business elements. And we're going to be talking about integrating Christian faith into the business world.
Mm-hmm.
So what first inspired your interest in helping Christians integrate their faith with their professional lives?
That's great. I think it started way back when we opened our first business. And again, I think most businesses that people start are birthed out of a need you see. And so mine was, I was a teacher, I was an educator, and I got pregnant with my first kid. So this was 25 years ago. And I realized, if I want to keep teaching, which is what I felt called to do, I'm going to need to put this child into daycare, preschool, which I had not ever set foot in that world. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, so I didn't know anything about it. And so you just begin investigating, where's a place that I can send her? And in that moment, I was looking for a school that had the faith side of it. And so I could find little preschools and daycares in churches that, little grandmas were singing Jesus Loves Me, and it was great. But academically, the teacher in me was the academics weren't excellent. And then I could find these state certified little daycares and preschools that had the academics, but they were missing the faith component. And it was that, juncture of all right, Lord, if I got to put her somewhere, I need it to be faith-filled and academic. And there just wasn't anything. And so the Sycamore Center was birthed, and it was our first business, and we opened a child care center, and we really wanted to incorporate faith and excellence in education. And it was in that moment that I realized, I shouldn't say in the moment we opened it, but going through that business for years, I started to see the powerful impact of Christ that I had through the business world. So, we had at one point 50 employees. And it being a state licensed center, I'm not going to discriminate based on, gender, race, sex, creed, all the stuff. And so I'm hiring the most qualified people. And a lot of times those people were not faith-filled individuals. Yet I was teaching a faith-filled curriculum. So I looked and I had these people who did not know Jesus having to sit underneath me and learn the little stories of Jonah. And then they have to go and teach them. And I'm watching God move in my employees' lives based on the fact that I had started a business. And so there was this huge impact on my staff that I thought these people would have never gone to church. They would have never walked through the doors of a church. One particular staff was a gentleman from the LGBTQ plus community, and he was the most qualified. And I was like, what do you do with this? And that was the moment when I realized, wow, the business community needs to learn how to navigate these landmines, for lack of a better word. When I have a business and it's state licensed and I'm operating in a world that doesn't know Jesus and I still want to live out my Jesus faith, how do those worlds collide? And I think that set me on a path of, I got to help these people navigate this. And I think that's what landed me eventually at LifeWork, which is doing just that.
Yeah, that is such a fascinating background story. And what a cool way to force people to study the Bible in a sense, right?
Hire you and you got to teach it. Well, and even the impact on the families. I mean, I had thousands of students at these schools. At one point, we had 4 locations and thousands of students, and we're teaching a Christian curriculum on the state's money because we were state certified. Wow. So the state's paying me grants. They flew all my staff to Disney World to train. I mean, so we're getting money from the state, and I'm getting to teach Jesus to families. And I was like, wow, this intersection, just became such a ministry component of our life that I was like, I got to figure out how to do this better.
Yeah, and do it better in a different context too, as well, right?
Correct.
That's so cool. Would you say that conversations about faith in the workplace are especially important right now? Are there any like contextual factors today that make this sort of thing particularly relevant?
I mean, I think we always go back to the stat that, Billy Graham had said right before he passed that the next great move of God would be in the workplace. I think it is people, yes, but I also think churches and pastors are beginning to recognize the amazing ministerial opportunities in the workplace. They say on average, an average working adult will spend 140,000 hours of their life at work.
Wow.
That same average person who is a strong believer will spend somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 hours at church. So what we get at church, which is huge and impactful, no doubt, is 3,000 to 4,000 hours. What we put in the workplace is astronomical in comparison to that. So if we don't figure out as believers how to take that Sunday faith and put it into the Monday through Friday workplace, we are missing out on the bulk of ministry that God's given us. And so I think we're starting to realize that, and we're starting to see that, and we're starting to, even churches are saying, hey, wait a minute, like I only get you for an hour a week, but you get to be in the workplace, 40, 50 hours a week, and there is ministry in that. So I do think it's a growing understanding. I don't think we've mastered the art of it yet, and I think that's where I get to step in and LifeWork gets to step in to help people.
We recognize the need. There's a huge disparity just in terms of the time that we're able to devote to these different things, but how exactly are we going to go about kind of mastering this? Yeah, that's important for sure. When I was looking into your organization, one of the things that kept coming up is that people loved looking at the life of Jesus and figuring out, how does he serve as a model, which he should, hopefully, right? And pretty much everything we're going to do, right? So what can we glean from him specifically where work contexts are concerned? And I wanted to start by asking this. We don't know much about Jesus's work as a carpenter, right? The Bible does mention it in one or two places. But do you think Christians can glean any insight from just knowing that he did that kind of work prior to his public ministry?
Yeah, of course. I mean, but even more so than, and not more so, I shouldn't say, but also he was a carpenter. But I think when we look at who he chose to be his disciples, he chose the workforce. So when we look at his 12 disciples, right, they were fishermen. So we have the labor industry. There was a tax collector, which is our finance and business district. We had a politician. They claim, Timothy was in the world of politics. Simon was a zealot, which is the military. Luke was a doctor, so we have the healthcare industry. So when you start looking at the people that Jesus chose to pour into for 3 years, and then he said, now you take this into the world. It was 12 business guys. He didn't choose the Pharisees or the Sadducees, who would have been the pastors or the religious leaders of the day. None of those were on the team of 12. His team of 12 were business guys. And I think he recognized that these are the guys that are out in the community. These are the people that are on the streets, pounding the pavement, pouring in the lives. Like, they were the business guys. And so when he chose those 12 and spent 3 years pouring into 12 business guys, I think we see that was of value to Jesus. And I think his carpentry business was just a way for him to connect to those guys, to say, listen, I've been there, I've done that. I've worked late nights, I've pounded the pavement, I've been, labor and work has been what I've done for these 30 years of my life. And so I think his carpentry was a way for him to connect with the business guys that he chose to pour into. And then those business guys, after walking with him for 3 years, they went back out and did their job. I mean, you even go back to like Paul, as we move along, Paul stayed a tent maker. Like, his job was tent making. Yeah. And he did ministry, of course, but he stayed as a tent maker the whole time. And, so these guys kept their job while they were ministering to the world. And, here we are now, thousands of years later, and millions of people have been presented the gospel from 12 business guys. I think that's a model for us to see.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm kind of hearing from this is that the fact that he had this background, it made him in a sense able to relate to these people based on, hey, I'm a worker too, right? I'm not just some guy who sat in a seminary my whole life or whatever, right? That's cool. Well, when you think about his, his interactions as a leader, what are some of the characteristics of his leadership that are most notable in your mind?
It's great. You're just teeing up the LifeWork leadership journey. So in LifeWork, that is what we do, is we focus on the top 10 leadership characteristics that we saw Jesus demonstrate with those disciples. So if we really want to look at the business community, we want to say these 12 guys are the business guys. Jesus chose them, poured into them. What were the top 10 leadership characteristics that we saw Jesus demonstrating? And that's what we take you through on this Jesus journey in LifeWork. And so it is relationships. I mean, it was key. And I mean, as generic as that sounds, we throw out, you got to build relationships with people all the time. It was diversity in relationships. Like the people that Jesus surrounded himself with were diverse in ethnicity, diverse in industry, diverse in socioeconomic. I mean, every facet that you can imagine, he pulled together diverse people. And so we say at LifeWork all the time, who are you putting around you? And one of our speakers uses this example, and I think it's great. He says, if you go through your Facebook or your Instagram feed, does everybody on that feed think like you, look like you, talk like you, act like you? If they do, then you're not diversifying yourself in that. And so relationship is a key that we see with Jesus. Compassion, generosity, humility, integrity. I mean, we look at some of these characteristics and they just define Jesus. And it's the characteristics that he told the disciples, this is how you have to lead. You have to lead with integrity, and you have to lead with humility and with compassion and generosity. And so I think those are some of the key leadership skills that we actually saw Jesus demonstrate with his disciples.
So when you look at these things, Jesus isn't explicitly teaching. I mean, he does teach, obviously, right? But he's not doing a seminar on how to lead, right? So what you do when you're doing these lessons is we look at kind of examples, we look at case studies in the Bible. Like, how does that work? How would you go about unpacking one of these elements of Jesus's leadership? If somebody wanted to do a study on it, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, that's great. In LifeWork, we really do. We kind of look at examples in Scripture where we see these characteristics played out, specifically from Jesus to his disciples. So we see when he demonstrated compassion, when he demonstrated generosity, integrity, and we walk through, we call it the Jesus journey. So we walk through where we see Jesus demonstrating these characteristics. Then we take it a step further and we try to bring in industry leaders who then talk about it practically, right? I tell people all the time, if you go to church on Sunday and you hear a great message and you walk out of the sanctuary on Sunday and you were like, yes, this is great. But by Wednesday you forgot the message, then it really wasn't that powerful. So if you come to LifeWork or any of these, you listen to this podcast and you're motivated by like, yes, I got to do a better job. I got to be a better leader. But you don't practically take any steps, then it really wasn't that impactful. And so at LifeWork and in general, I would say anybody that's listening, you hear a story of what Jesus did and you see an example of it, but then we bring in industry leaders that help us practically put it into our life. And so we focus on home, work, and the church or the community at large. And so when we talk about, let's say, compassion, and that's the topic for this session, and we're going to show examples of where Jesus lived out compassion, how he did it. Then we're going to bring in industry leaders that talk about how to do it in the workplace. So like, how can you demonstrate compassion in your workplace? And we'll talk from if I'm the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company to I'm an entrepreneur who just opened a business and I'm my only employee, whether you're a manager, a middle manager, or you're a stay-at-home mom. Like, we'll pull them all in and say, how can you live out compassion in your place of work right now? And they'll give examples of what they've done. We'll do case studies. So we really want you to practically take the concept into work. And so you then have a takeaway after every session that you have to come back and report. Like, this is how I'm going to start showing compassion in work. This is how I'm going to live with more integrity. And so we want them to take these skills and put them into action in the workplace.
Yeah, you've got to form a habit, right?
Correct.
You can't. It's not enough to just walk out and go, Wow, they're right. Compassion is important, right? I need to
Right.
think like and I love that you mentioned the home too, right? I mean, I would imagine that the vast majority of these skills that are good for leaders are also helpful. It's good to be compassionate at home,
Correct.
right?
I mean,
Too,
with
right?
my husband, I have to be
Yeah,
compassionate,
yeah,
right? He needs
yeah.
to be, I mean, all these skills, these are life skills that we tend to do a pretty good job in the home with them as believers. And we tend to do a really good job as like our person. Like, yes, I need to be compassionate. I need
Hmm.
to be. We don't transition these skills well into the workplace though. Like we somehow leave them at the door and we're like, we can be compassionate at home. But when I walk into work, it's like, I'm the boss and you got to
Yeah.
do it. And so we're really focusing on getting our business leaders to see that these characteristics and these life leadership skills have to be taken into work for you to make the
Hmm.
kind of impact that we want you to make.
Yeah. That's really cool. And I mean, it's interesting though to notice that there are all these opportunities in these different domains to start forming those habits,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you can start making the connections,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay, I'm doing okay at home, but maybe not so good. How would my work life look different if I was acting like I would at home?
Right,
Something like
right.
that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just for me, it's a helpful way to start thinking about some of
Mm-hmm.
these things. That's really cool. Um, one of the things that people are always talking about in business context is the mission of the organization. And in Christianity, of course, we talk about having a calling in our lives. When we think about Jesus, do you see evidence of him having a very clear mission and calling? And how do you, as a business person, like, what does that say to you as a
Mm-hmm.
business person?
It's interesting. I got back 3 days ago from South Africa. I had the
Hmm.
opportunity to be in South Africa. Um, so there's a large church in South Africa called Doxodeo, and they have 35 campuses all over. They're
Wow.
amazing. And they really kind of started this, they call it the City Changers movement. And they began to recognize that the church has to get out of the walls of the church to get into the city to really make kingdom impact.
Hmm.
And so they were, 30 years ago, really burdened with we've got to get outside of the walls of the church. So they started this idea of City Changers movement. It really was taking the church to the streets. And they focused on education, business, and then the church. They discovered LifeWork, which is a faith-based business model. And they were like, this is the model we want to use. So they ended up bringing LifeWork under them. And years later, they ended up taking on LifeWork. So LifeWork now sits underneath this City Changers movement, which sits under Doxodeo, the church. And that's all out of South Africa. So they had their global retreat this past couple weeks. So I had the opportunity to go there and really see what they're doing in South Africa through this City Changers movement. And I think to your question, what it did for me, especially seeing what they're doing globally, is very humbling for me, because I think as a business leader, I'm very big on what is your mission? What is your vision, right? We write mission statements and vision statements, and we do them in work, we do them in our personal life. And so it's a very trendy model. And they basically just blew that model up for me. And they said, listen, not that you don't want to have a mission statement or anything like that, but they said, your mission is thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So your mission, whether it's a business, a church, or a person, is to make earth look as much like heaven right now, however you can do that. So you should be spending every second of every day making earth look like heaven. And so they just kind of this idea of I have one mission, because we in the States, I kept saying, because with LifeWork, we started some coffee shops, Cup of Joe. And when we started them a couple years ago, my board was like, oh, this is going to be mission creep. And this is a word we use in the States a lot. You're creeping away from your mission. And so we had a lot of pushback when I wanted to open these coffee shops, because they're like, you're going to get distracted and da-da-da-da-da. And so we throw that term around a lot. And I said it when I was in South Africa, and the guy looked at me and he said, wait, what? And I said, mission creep. And he's like, I don't even know what that is. And so I kind of explained it, and he's like, that is the most made up thing I've ever heard. He said, because your mission is to change this earth to look like heaven, however you can do it. So if it is starting coffee shops, if it is running businesses, if it is expand, however, like your mission is thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth. And I thought, man, so many times in the States, we get kind of pigeonholed into this is our mission statement and this is our vision statement. And I'm not knocking it because I have them, but I think just that you ask it, like it's been so fresh in my mind that I'm like, man, I need to diversify, right? Like if I really started looking at it as, Lord, however you want me to impact this earth for your kingdom, I'm willing to do it. That's the mission.
That's
And so I think in businesses, that's what you got to look at. It's not as much of, I sell this product, I buy this product, I, work in AI, I'm whatever it is.
Right.
It is however I can change this earth for Christ. That's my mission.
Yeah. We're not here to sell a product.
Right.
Right. Like that might be in a season the most expedient way to make the earth look like heaven, right? But that's not what we're here to do. We're here to make earth look like heaven in whatever ways are going to be available to us, right? Suppose that someone's listening to this, a business leader, and they're thinking about practical ways to incorporate Christian values into their secular workplace. I guess we've touched on this a little bit, but do you see some are there any like particular actions that you can point to that a person in that situation could take to begin shaping their business culture with Christian values?
I think at the core, and this is what we talk about, and I tell my leaders that come through LifeWork, is the very first thing we do at LifeWork is a session on knowing God. And I think, in Daniel, there's a verse that talks about, those who know God are bold, ultimately, is what it's saying. And so I think for us to be bold in the workplace with our faith, it comes from really knowing God. And that's the first thing. Like, you have to know God and know him well. So you know what he wants you to do and how he wants you to do it. So I think that's key. Second is, I think there's a lot of business leaders, Christian business leaders, who are afraid. We live in a very politically correct world right now. And so they're walking on eggshells as far as, what am I allowed to say? What am I allowed to do? And I think most Christian leaders, if you're listening to this, would be utterly surprised by the legal, I don't know what the right word, what we're able to do legally. We're actually allowed to do a whole lot more than you would expect in a secular workplace. And so when I was a teacher in the public school, this was when I started tiptoeing into this. And I was like, can I leave a Bible on my desk? Like, I've got all these curriculum things. I just want to leave my Bible on the desk, because during my prep period, I would do my devotions. And can I leave my Bible on the desk? I didn't even know if I was allowed. Like, am I allowed to do that? I don't know. And so I went into my principal and I'm like, listen, I just don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to lose my job, tiptoeing around it. And he was like, no, you can't. And I was like, okay. So I took my Bible off, but it just didn't settle with me. And I was like, I don't think they can do that. So I began investigating, right? And discovered I absolutely can keep my Bible out, and I can teach from my Bible, right? I mean, so you begin to learn these things that you're able to do. I came across, and again, this is another story that probably could take a whole nother podcast, but we were in a little bit of a legal situation with my daughter's Instagram account was stolen. Her identity was stolen. And so we were wrestling with this, and it cost her a job, and it cost her a scholarship, and just a really, really rough experience. And we're fighting with lawyers and trying to fight Facebook and Instagram, and it was crazy. And I stumbled across an organization called ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom. And they are the largest religious legal organization in the world. And so they fight for religious rights. And they took the case, they won the case. It was an amazing story. When I discovered them, they have this little book that they give to anybody that really is like it is my business Bible, for lack of a better word, of all the things that you're allowed to do. And so I think that took away for me a lot of the fear that I had, knowing that I had more resources and I had people behind me if I do stand up for some things in the workplace. And so I think business leaders would be surprised to know you can put things in your mission statement. You can have Bible studies. You can share your faith. You can hire people. I mean, there's so much more we can do that I think business leaders are a little tentative because of the political atmosphere. And so I would encourage people that you can do a lot with your ministry. So knowing God, I think recognizing the power that you have, that you can do more and live out your faith in a secular workplace. Obviously, we always talk about just the ministry, but I think doing business with excellence and living out the leadership characteristics that we see in Jesus are more powerful than you would realize. And that's integrity. paying your employees well, showing up at work on time. I mean, as simple as those things sound, we were just talking about our kids before we started. Those are the lessons I'm teaching my kids right now as they're entering the workforce. They're probably not going to be able to start a business and, have a Christian mission statement in their business just yet. But they can show up at their job at Putt-Putt on time. And they can be a person of integrity. And they can be joyful when they walk through the door. And they can live out that faith with their life in work. And that is more powerful than anything.
You just said something that was really interesting in terms of the roles that people fill. Obviously, business leaders are making kind of conscious decisions about the way, or hopefully are making conscious decisions about the way their culture is being shaped. Do you feel like people who are running organizations have a greater degree of this liberty to impact culture in terms of their faith than your regular employee,
manager,
or would it be the other way, or are they kind of equal?
You mentioned calling. Everybody as a follower of Christ have a primary calling and a secondary calling. Our primary calling is to go into all the world and teach and preach the gospel. As believers in Christ, that is the primary calling. Our secondary calling is how we're doing the primary calling. So my calling, first and foremost, is to share the gospel, to bring glory to the Lord. How I do that is my secondary calling. So do I have more impact if I run my own business? Not necessarily, because if I'm doing what God called me to do, then I should be having the maximum impact. So whether it's I own my own business, or whether it's I'm an employee for somebody, or whether it is, I'm retired, if that is where God called you, then that is how you should be living out your primary calling, which is to go into all the world and teach and preach the gospel. And so sometimes it may feel like if you own your own business, you have a little bit more control over it. And to that extent, yes. I mean, I don't own. LifeWork owns the coffee shops. I run LifeWork. So I have the power and the authority to change the mission statements, to put a verse on the wall, to hire certain people, to do certain things. So I have control to do that. But that doesn't mean that that's more impactful than my barista, who is serving our customers and praying for them and talking to them and sharing with them. I don't get to see the customers. I'm up here doing the business stuff. I don't get to see the customers. If anything, they have more impact because they're talking with the people. And so I think there's value in both. And I think it's really recognizing that my calling is to take the gospel. And the way that I do it is my secondary calling, which is my job or my career.
So for someone like maybe a barista who's just starting out in their career, right, or wherever they're beginning their career, are there any particular habits or disciplines that you think would help them to keep Christ at the center of their work?
I think it's the same that we would tell somebody that's in your personal life, right? I mean, I would tell my employees all the time, when you walk through the door at work, you kind of check yourself at the door. And you recognize that when I cross this door, I'm crossing into ministry. Like, this is my ministry. And so I think we've done a terrible job in the church in teaching that. We'll say, your work is your ministry. I mean, I heard that growing up, right? But no doubt growing up in the church, I somehow thought that if I worked in full-time vocational ministry, that was more ministry than being a barista. And we say it. I don't think there's any pastor that doesn't stand up and say, yes, your job as a garbage truck driver is ministry. We'll say it, but we don't show it. We don't live it. We don't demonstrate it. We don't value it. All the more with women. As a woman being career oriented, I walked in a space that very few women walk, because in the Christian world, most women took the higher calling, so I thought, which was being a stay-at-home mom. And so when I choose to navigate a career as a woman, I had to fight against the church to say, wait a minute, there is space for me in here. And the church just doesn't do a great job with that. We need to do a better job. And so for young people starting out, even my own kids, like, I'm hearing my kids start to say things like, well, maybe I just need to go into ministry and that's how I can serve the Lord. And every part of me, obviously, if that's where God called you, of course, but every part of me wants to shake them and say, that's not the only ministry. That is a ministry. But they're going to impact 3,000 to 4,000 hours of a human's life. You are going to potentially have the impact of 140,000 hours of somebody's life in the workplace. There is so much more ministry in that than what we realize. And so for a young barista starting out, or a middle manager, or just an employee, a carpenter. I mean, when we're talking about these men in the Bible, they were fishermen and carpenters. These weren't big time CEOs of multi-billion-dollar companies. These were laborers. But they used their job as the avenue to bring the gospel to people that probably were not going to set foot in the synagogue, or people that aren't going to set foot in the church. So when you walk through the door at your job, whatever it is, I would just encourage you to just pause before you walk through the door and say, I'm stepping into ministry right now. Lord, show me who you want me to talk to. Show me how you want me to behave, how you want me to work, and let that be your ministry.
Yeah, I know that people have talked about this as a sort of like sacred secular divide, right? That we have a tendency to just think of like, well, there's the God stuff that I do on Sundays, and maybe, when I'm having my morning coffee, I'll sit down and read the Bible. And then there's all the just regular stuff that, I have to do. And that's just not the way that the Bible teaches about the world. It's not the way that Christians have thought about work, really ever, right? And I think that the way that you talked about mission makes that very clear. When you get a clear picture that, we need to be making this earth look more like heaven, and there are so many different ways to do that, right? I mean, Jesus brings healing to people, right? We can go work in medicine, and we're doing kingdom work in medicine. We can, he's making people whole, not just in some, I don't want to downplay justification, right? Like being justified is very important,
big deal,
right? Yeah.
Right.
But no, but I mean that the work of Jesus is a progressive one, where people are changed throughout their lives, right? And they're able to experience the blessings of his kingdom as they live in that relationship with him. Sorry, I started to preach a little bit there.
No, I think it's good. We talk about in LifeWork the 4-chapter gospel. And so there's this idea, kind of like what you're saying with justification. As believers, we're like, that's the biggest deal, right? Jesus died on the cross to save us, and we have eternal life. And that's what we grow up grasping onto. And obviously, like you said, we're not minimizing that. There is something to that. But there is this idea that that's a 2-chapter gospel, they call it. Whereas the 4-chapter gospel is recognizing the power of work. And so there's this really cool little visual I can show you at some point. But it really is kind of like, God created man. Man sinned. There's the cross in the middle, right? That Jesus came and died. He's the Son of Man. He came and died. Therefore, we're redeemed from that. But on the other side, when he created man, he also created the earth, right? And so then we have this parallel line that goes across that says earth was created. Because man sinned, the Bible says the earth was cursed, right? So now we have to work the land, we have to work the ground. So God's creation was cursed. But that same cross is in the middle that is restoring the earth to thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth. So we have this idea of this kind of like cross, whereas like man was created, sinned, Jesus redeemed them. But then there's also the earth was created, it was cursed, Christ redeemed the earth, and we're meant to restore the earth. So as much as we are redeemed in justification, we are also called to restore the earth. And that's where work lands. And it's like we give so much emphasis to the salvation aspect, which obviously is eternal, and I don't want to minimize it, but I don't think we do enough justice in talking about the importance of restoring the earth, and that's being restored through work.
Yeah, and historically, I know in the church, people will sometimes talk about the Protestant work ethic, that this is something that people, when they started, getting the Bible and being able to access the scriptures and everything, they started to realize like, wow, like, the work that I do is actually really important, and I can start viewing, my day-to-day job as something that glorifies God. I don't have to be a bishop or a priest in order to do that. And it really started to impact the way that people did good work throughout history. So people might be interested.
Dorothy Sayers is, she's nailed the work thing, and that's kind of her thing. We do good work as unto the Lord.
Yeah.
It really is the way we bring glory to the Lord.
Well, that's a great resource for people to check out if they're interested in thinking more about that as well. We're about out of time, but if you could leave our listeners with maybe one challenge or encouragement
Mm,
about living out their faith at work, what would that be?
it's great. Again, don't ever minimize your career or your job as less than what it actually is, which is it is what God called you to do to minister to the world. So look for opportunities to minister every single day at your job. It's not
Mm.
just a job, it's your ministry. Um, and if every Christian could recognize that and live in that, I think we would fulfill what Billy Graham said and we would see the next great move of God coming through the business.
And if I can even just kind of park on something there, looking for opportunities to minister, as we've said, that doesn't mean you have to evangelize today, right? I
Right.
mean, you can. That's
You can,
great if
that's
you
great.
get
That's
that.
right. But go to work and do your job. Do it with joy and thankfulness and gratitude and be a person of integrity and demonstrate compassion and be generous. I mean, all those characteristics that we talked about, that exemplifies Christ in the workplace, and people will see that, and you will have a bigger impact than you ever realize.
That's excellent. Dr. McClafferty, I've had a great time
Yeah, thanks for
talking to you.
having
Thank you
me.
so much for being here.
This was
And
great.
thanks to all of you who have been listening. And we hope you enjoyed it. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time.